Autumn New Haven has always been special to me. The golden leaves of the maples, the cool breeze off the bay, and the smell of baked apples created that special atmosphere that I had loved since my youth. In my 73 years, I have learned to appreciate such moments even more. The quiet streets of my neighborhood knew me better than my own son. Sylvia, came the voice of Pearl Griffith, my neighbor to my left, as I trimmed the rose bushes on the front porch. Did you hear the news about the old library building? I straightened, feeling my lower back protest. Pearl, a petite woman in her 80s with a mop of gray hair, always knew all the local gossip before the newspapers. Are they going to tear it down again? I asked, wiping my hands on my apron. This time it's serious. Some young businessman from New York came, all dressed up in an expensive suit. They say he offered an astronomical amount of money. Not while I'm alive, I said firmly, taking off my gardening gloves. Do you want peppermint or thyme tea? Pearl laughed, heading toward my porch. The usual peppermint and 2 spoonfuls of sugar, and your lemon pie, if there's any left. Such porch conversations have been my daily ritual for the past 15 years, since Henry's passing. My husband, a professor of literature at Yale University, left me not only a house and an antique store, but also the ability to appreciate life's little joys. Although I sold the store 5 years ago, our home remained the same, cozy, filled with books and antiques, each one holding a story. How's Corbin? Pearl asked as we settled into the wicker chairs with cups of tea. I hadn't seen him around here in a while. I looked away, staring at the old apple tree in the yard. Busy. He and Isadora have a lot of work to do. Pearl snorted. Too busy to visit his mother? I didn't answer. My relationship with my son was a subject I preferred not to discuss, even with my closest friends. But Pearl knew me too well. That girl really turned his head, she continued, sipping her tea. I remember what a caring boy he was. He used to come every Sunday and fix everything in the house. And now what? A phone call every 6 months? Really? What's happened to my Corbin? 43 big company lawyer, always been a mama's boy, until I met Isadora. People change, Pearl, I replied quietly. He's grown up. Nonsense! Pearl set the cup down on the table with such force that the tea spilled out onto the saucer. It's all the influence of that, what's her name? Fashion designer. Fashion designer, I corrected myself. She has her own line. Who cares? She's 15 years younger than him, and she looks at you like you're furniture. Pearl was right. From the first time we met, Isadora Price, now Abbott, had looked right through me. Tall, slender, with perfect posture and carefully arranged brown hair, she embodied the type of woman I would never have found common ground with. She'd walked into my house 3 years ago, looked at the antique dressers and heavy-framed paintings, and I'd seen the judgment in her eyes. Old-fashioned, tasteless, unstylish. Corbin is happy, I said, more to convince myself. That's the main thing. Happy? Pearl raised a gray eyebrow. He looks like a man who's lost himself. Did you see him at Christmas? He looked at his watch every 5 minutes until that woman called and ordered him back. I sighed, remembering my son's last visit. Corbin really only spent 3 hours with me on Christmas Eve, constantly glancing at his phone. When I asked if he was staying for dinner, he smiled guiltily. Sorry, Mom. Izzy has a reception planned for the firm's partners. Remember how she reacted when you gave her grandma's brooch? Pearl continued, oblivious to my discomfort. Of course I remembered. A silver brooch with an opal, passed down in our family for 4 generations. Vintage is out of fashion now, Sylvia, Isadora said, carelessly placing the brooch case on the table. I never saw her in that piece of jewelry again. Life changes, Pearl, I said, standing up. More tea? But the real change began after their wedding 2 years ago. Corbin had gradually disappeared from my life. First, he missed our traditional Sunday meeting, the office meeting. Then he canceled our trip to the theater together because Isadora was tired after the show. Then the calls became shorter and the visits less frequent. Everything changed 6 months ago when I was hospitalized with pneumonia. 3 weeks in the ward, and during that time, Corbin showed up only twice for 10 minutes with a bouquet of flowers and the usual questions. But Pearl Ruth Myers from the book club, even Agatha Cunningham, with whom we often argued at meetings of the Historic Preservation Committee, came every day. When I was discharged, I realized for the first time the bitter truth. My son was no longer a part of my life. And then Isadora came in. "Sylvia?" she said, standing in my living room, looking around like she was evaluating merchandise at a rummage sale. Corbin and I had discussed the situation. It's not safe to live alone at your age. "I'm 73, not 103, I replied, surprised at her tone. "I'm doing fine." "Nevertheless," she continued, "we found an excellent boarding house for the elderly. Golden Autumn is a very prestigious place. You'll have your own room, medical staff nearby." "Boarding house?" I questioned, not believing my ears. "Are you suggesting I move into a nursing home?" "Sylvia." Her thin lips formed into a condescending smile. "It's a state-of-the-art facility for people your age. They even have computer courses." I looked at her, trying to see if she was serious. "What about my house? My things? My friends?" "The house can be sold." Isadora shrugged. "It's old and needs constant repairs. Things? Well, the most valuable things you can take with you. The rest." She made a vague gesture with her hand. At that moment, I felt something inside me snap. Not so much from her words, but from the realization of what was behind it. A house in an upscale neighborhood that could be sold for good money. An old mother who'd better be rid of. And worst of all, my son probably knew and approved of the plan. "Isadora," I straightened, feeling a lump in my throat. "Thank you for your concern, but I'm not moving anywhere." Her face changed. The fake smile was gone. Her eyes narrowed. "You don't understand. Corbin's worried. We're worried. After your illness?" I said no. I said firmly, "This is my home, and I will stay here." From that day on, Isadora showed her dislike openly. She rarely spoke to me, and if she did, it was with ill-concealed irritation. Corbin became even more distant, as if he were avoiding conflict between his wife and mother. "Here's the mail." Pearl snapped me out of my reverie, holding out a stack of envelopes. "The letter carrier left it when you were in the garden." Among the bills and advertisements, I found a postcard of a picturesque lakeside cottage. On the back was my son's familiar handwriting. "Mom, Izzy and I rented this cottage for the weekend. It's a beautiful place just outside of New Haven. Come Friday, we'll spend some time together. Corbin." I reread the short message several times. It wasn't like Corbin to make such spontaneous invitations. It certainly didn't sound like Isadora to want to spend the weekend with her mother-in-law. "What is it?" Pearl asked, finishing her tea. "Corbin's inviting me to the country for the weekend," I said, still looking at the card. "Really?" Pearl looked surprised. "What's changed?" "Good question. What could have changed? I've only seen my son twice in the last 6 months, and both times the meetings were tense and brief. Maybe they're trying to reconcile," Pearl suggested, but there was skepticism in her voice. "Maybe." I nodded, though my gut told me something was wrong. That evening, I called my old friend Ruth Myers. Unlike Pearl, Ruth was diplomatic and sensible. We'd met 30 years ago at a book club and had maintained a close friendship ever since, even though she'd moved to the suburbs 15 years ago. "Sylvia, honey, how are you?" Her calm voice always had a calming effect on me. "I got a strange invitation from Corbin." I got right to the point. He wants me to spend the weekend in the country with Isadora. Hmm, Ruth said. Unusual. I wondered, what's this sudden desire to be a family? Will you go? I wondered. On the one hand, my intuition told me there was something behind this invitation. On the other hand, it was a chance to bond with my son. I guess so, I finally answered. After all, what have I got to lose? Be careful, Sylvia, Ruth warned me, and remember that I'm always here for you. Call me if you need anything. I sat in the rocking chair for a long time afterward, looking at the family photos on the mantelpiece. Corbin at 5 years old on his father's shoulders. Corbin is a senior in high school, proud and serious. Corbin with his law degree, and the little photo in the corner is of him and Isadora on their wedding day. In all but the last photo, he was smiling genuinely. In the morning, I called my son. Mom? His voice sounded a little strained. Did you get the card? Yes, thank you for the invitation. I'll be there. Oh, that's great. He seemed both excited and nervous. We'll pick you up Friday at 3:00. No need. I can drive myself. I have a car, I objected. A pause on the other end of the line. Are you sure? It's a little far. Corbin, I'm not going to fall apart on the way, I said with slight irritation. Just give me the address. After a short pause, he dictated the address of the cottage. We exchanged a few more sentences and said goodbye. Friday morning, I packed a small bag with my belongings. I put in the family photo album. I wanted to show Corbin some old pictures he might not remember. My old Ford started on the first try. Despite my age, I was a good driver and kept the car regularly maintained. Stay in touch, Pearl instructed me as she watched me pack. And call me if you need anything. Stop it? I smiled. What could happen? It's just a family weekend. But as I drove out of the yard, a strange feeling clenched my heart. Something told me this weekend would change everything. I didn't yet know how right I was. The drive to the cottage took a little over an hour. I drove slowly, enjoying the scenery of fall Connecticut, the bright colors of the leaves, the quiet country roads, and the small lakes that reflected the clouds. The navigator brought me to a scenic spot by a small wooded lake. The cottage looked just like on the postcard, a two-story wooden house with a veranda surrounded by tall pine trees. As I pulled up to the house, I noticed Corbin's black SUV, so they were already here. I turned off the engine and sat still for a few minutes, collecting my thoughts. A strange sense of unease had been lingering in my mind since this morning. What to expect from this weekend? A sincere reconciliation? Or another attempt to persuade me to move to a prestigious boarding house? Taking a deep breath, I picked up my bag and a photo album covered in shabby leather. The album was a treasure to me. It held the photos of 5 generations of my family. Maybe it would help remind Corbin of our roots, of who we used to be to each other. Before I reached the porch, the door opened and Corbin appeared. A polite smile on his face, but his eyes were troubled, avoiding a direct gaze. Mom! He came over and hugged me awkwardly. You got here fast. The roads were clear, I replied, studying his face, the new wrinkles around his eyes, the tense line of his lips. My son looked tired. Let me help you with your bag. He took my travel bag and walked me into the house. Inside, the cottage was more spacious than it looked from the outside. A bright living room with a fireplace, panoramic windows overlooking the lake, a modern kitchen. Isadora stood at the stove, stirring something in a pot. When she heard our footsteps, she turned around. Sylvia. She nodded without a smile. Welcome. Thank you for inviting me, Isadora, I said sincerely. It's a lovely house? Yes, we loved it. She went back to cooking, clearly not wanting to continue the conversation. I'll show you to your room. Corbin headed for the narrow staircase to the second floor. I followed him, noticing that Isadora hadn't even offered me tea on the way. Once upstairs, Corbin opened a door at the very end of the hallway. Here, make yourself comfortable. I stepped into a small room with a single bed, a tiny dresser, and a view of the backyard, not the lake. There was barely enough space to turn around with my bag. What about the other rooms? I blurted out involuntarily. Corbin frowned. Izzy and I are in the master bedroom, and we've set up the second bedroom as her office. She's bringing in designs for a new collection. I see, I nodded, trying to hide my disappointment. It's a cozy room. Make yourself comfortable, Corbin repeated. Dinner in an hour. When I was alone, I sat down on the narrow bed. The mattress was hard, the pillow thin. Looking around, I noticed that there wasn't even a chair in the room, just a metal coat hook on the wall. Instead of a lamp, there was a bare bulb under the ceiling. The room looked more like a closet than a guest bedroom, but I decided not to bring it up. After all, I'd come to mend relationships, not to find more conflict. After laying out my few belongings, I changed into more comfortable clothes and went downstairs. Corbin was sitting on the couch, staring at his laptop. Isadora was still in the kitchen. "What can I do for you?" I asked, approaching her. Isadora flinched as if oblivious to my presence. "No need, I can handle it," she said, not even turning around. "I could set the table." I said no need. Her voice turned icy. "Go get some rest." I retreated, feeling superfluous in this house. Walking over to the panoramic window, I stared out at the lake. The sun was slipping towards sunset, coloring the water with golden pink tones. A beautiful view that no one seemed to notice. "Corbin," I called out to my son, "would you like to take a walk to the lake before dinner?" He looked away from the screen, blinking a few times, as if coming back to reality. "Sorry, Mom, I have to finish this report. Maybe tomorrow?" I nodded and went back to contemplating the scenery outside the window. It was strange to watch everyone pretending it was a normal family vacation while everyone was minding their own business, ignoring everyone else. Dinner passed in the same tense atmosphere. Isadora made some fancy vegetarian dish, quinoa with vegetables and tofu. I've never been a fan of tofu, but out of politeness I complimented the food. "It's delicious, Isadora. Unusual, but delicious." She raised an eyebrow. "It's a basic recipe, Sylvia. Everyone cooks like that nowadays." Really, I was surprised. Our generation favored more traditional cooking. I remember my mother making delicious casseroles with meat and "That's why your generation suffers from cholesterol and heart disease," Isadora interrupted with a strained smile. "They didn't know about proper nutrition back then." I fell silent, feeling my cheeks redden. Corbin continued to eat, avoiding looking at both of us. "How's your new collection, Isadora?" I asked after a pause, trying to change the subject. "Excellent." She instantly perked up. "I'm using sustainable materials inspired by the Northern Lights. Critics are already calling it revolutionary." "Sounds interesting." I was really trying to show interest. "When is the show?" "December." She sipped her wine. "In New York, a select few. Vogue magazine will be covering it." "That's great," I smiled. "I'd love to see it." Isadora choked on her wine and coughed. Corbin tensed. "It's a private screening, Mom," he said. "Only for industry professionals." "I thought there were exceptions for family," I said, trying to keep my voice light, but feeling a pang of resentment inside. "Business is business," Isadora cut him off. "You can't mix professional and personal." After that, the conversation at the table faded away. Corbin asked about my health, and I said I was fine. Isadora ate in silence, checking messages on her phone. When dinner was over, I offered to do the dishes, but Isadora again declined to help. "We have a dishwasher, Sylvia. Not everyone lives in the last century." I retired to the living room, taking the family photo album with me. Maybe now would be a good time to show Corbin the old pictures. When he joined me on the couch, I opened the album. Look, here's you at 3 years old fishing with Daddy. I smiled, showing him a yellowed photo of little Corbin excitedly holding a fishing rod next to Henry. He took a quick glance and nodded. Yes, I remember. And here you are, 7, first day of school. Remember that backpack with the dinosaurs? You insisted I sew extra pockets for your rock collection. Corbin smiled slightly. That's funny. I turned the page. And here's your grandfather teaching you how to play the guitar. You were so focused. Just then, Isadora entered the living room. When she saw what we were doing, she sighed irritably. Corbin, you promised to help me with the spreadsheets for the presentation. She looked at her watch defiantly. Yes, of course. He stood up quickly. Sorry, Mom. We'll continue later. I was left alone with the album. It was dark outside the window. The lake was a black mirror reflecting the stars. I flipped through the pages, looking at the faces of our family, my parents, grandparents, uncles, and aunts, many of whom were no longer alive. A story captured on paper, a story that no one seemed to care about but me. Around 10 p.m., I decided to go up to my room. As I passed the study, I heard the voices of Corbin and Isadora. I don't usually eavesdrop on other people's conversations, but my name, spoken in Isadora's irritated tone, made me stop. She brought that ancient scrapbook, Corbin. Seriously, in the age of digital photos? It's important to her, Izzy. My son's voice sounded tired. It's a memory. Memories? Isadora snorted. It's old junk, like most things in her house. Have you seen those awful porcelain figurines on the mantelpiece? They're not even antiques. They're just tasteless. My cheeks burned with shame and anger. The bird figurines on my mantelpiece were Henry's gifts for every wedding anniversary. 25 figurines, each with a special meaning. Izzy, don't start, Corbin asked. We've talked about this. No, you listen, she insisted. It was time to settle this matter once and for all. Golden Autumn is the perfect place for her. Professional care, socialization with her peers. She'll be better off there than in that old house that's about to fall apart. She doesn't want to move, Corbin objected, but his voice sounded uncertain. Of course she doesn't, Isadora exclaimed. No one wants to admit that she's getting old and needs help. But we must decide for her. It's for her own good. I stood against the wall, feeling my heart pounding in my chest. They're planning to decide for me? Like I'm incapacitated? I spoke to the administrator of Golden Autumn. Corbin continued after a pause. They can accept her within a month, but the house has to be settled first. At last! Isadora's voice was full of satisfaction. I've already contacted the realtor. According to his estimation, after a little repair and modern design, the house can be sold for at least $750,000. The neighborhood is prestigious, and land there is at a premium. I froze, not believing my ears. They had already appraised my house? Are they planning to sell it? I'm not sure Mom would agree, Corbin said. It's my childhood home. It's where my grandparents lived. That's why we organized this weekend. Isadora interrupted impatiently. To convince her, to show her how good it is to live in a modern house. We'll tell her about the benefits of Golden Autumn. I've even prepared brochures. Izzy, you can't just go and... You can and you should. Her voice is getting hard. You said yourself you were worried about her. After that pneumonia, she's been a mess. What's a year from now? 2 years from now? Are you ready to quit your job and take care of her? There was a long pause. No, Corbin finally answered. But there must be another way. There is no other way out. Isadora cut him off. A boarding house or a nurse to live with her. But caregivers are expensive, and we could use the money from the sale of the house. especially with your partnership prospects at the firm. I feel like I've been splashed with cold water. That's it. It's not about taking care of me. It's about the money from the sale of the house. The house my parents left me. The house where 3 generations of our family grew up. I'll talk to her tomorrow, Corbin said. I'll try to explain the situation. Just don't fall for her manipulations, Isadora warned him. She will press on pity, remember the past, show these old photos. Be firm. I'll try, Corbin promised, and in his voice I could hear the humility of a man who'd already given up. Quietly, trying not to squeak the floorboards, I stepped away from the door and headed for the stairs. My head was buzzing from what I'd heard. They were planning to rob me of my home, send me to a nursing home, dispose of my life without my consent, all under the pretense of caring. Going up to my room, I sat on my bed, clutching the photo album in my hands. My hands were shaking, a lump in my throat. Not out of resentment, but out of anger. How could they? How could my own son be a part of this? I opened the album to the last page, where there was a picture from Henry's 60th birthday, the last birthday before he died. The whole family at a large table in the garden. Corbin was sitting next to his father, both of them laughing at some joke. I remembered that day like it was yesterday, the sunshine, the smell of jasmine, the sound of jazz from the old record player. What would Henry say when he saw how his son treated his mother? What would my father, a former judge, say when he learned that his grandson planned to actually evict me from the ancestral home? I don't know how long I sat like that, looking at the pictures and thinking about the betrayal. An hour? 2? It was dark outside the window, and there were no more voices coming from behind the office door. I went down to the first floor for a glass of water and saw that my photo album, left on the couch, was gone. Looking for something? Isadora's voice caught me off guard. She was standing at the kitchen counter with a glass of wine. My scrapbook, I answered. I left it on the couch. Oh, that. She made an indefinite gesture with her hand. I put it away. It didn't fit in. Put it away where? My voice shook. Isadora shrugged. Into the trash. Where else? The thing was so dusty and shabby. I froze, not believing my ears. You threw away my family album? I asked, feeling a chill go down my spine. It's time to get rid of the old stuff, Sylvia. She sipped her wine. Live in the present. I rushed to the trash can under the sink. Opening it, I saw my sketchbook tossed on top of the remains of dinner. I pulled it out, noting with horror that several pages were soaked in gravy. How could you? I turned to Isadora, trembling with indignation. There are pictures of 5 generations of my family in here. Your family? She raised an eyebrow. Our family, and I have the right to decide what we keep in our house and what we throw away. It's not your house, I argued, clutching the ruined album to my chest. You're renting it for the weekend, and the album is my personal property. Personal property, Isadora repeated with a sneer. Like all that junk in your house? You know, Sylvia, sooner or later you have to admit that you can't live alone, and then you'll have to decide what to do with all this. Inheritance, she said the last word as contemptuously as if she were talking about garbage. I straightened up, looking her straight in the eye. I'm doing fine on my own, and I intend to stay in my house as long as I want to. Isadora laughed. You really think so? Let's face it, Sylvia. You're 73. You've barely recovered from pneumonia. Who's going to take care of you when you can't get out of bed? Corbin? He's got a career. Me? I have a business. No, your future is an institution with 24-hour care. I'll decide my own future, I said firmly, without your help. She shrugged. We'll see. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have to work on my sketches. And she retreated to her office, leaving me standing in the kitchen with the ruined sketchbook in my hands. I went back to my room, put the sketchbook carefully on the dresser, and sat on my bed. Sleep wouldn't come. My mind was reeling with bits and pieces of the conversation I'd overheard and the confrontation I'd just had. For her own good, we could use the money from the sale of the house. Time to get rid of the old junk. It was beginning to dawn outside the window when I finally made a decision. I will not be a victim. I won't let my life or my things be taken. If Corbin and Isadora think they can just send me to a nursing home and take over my inheritance, they are sorely mistaken. I am Sylvia Abbott, and I intend to fight. It was a cloudy morning. Heavy leaden clouds hung over the lake, and a light fog swirled over the water. I was barely awake, but I felt strangely determined. Carefully going through the pages of the album, I separated the ones that were hopelessly ruined by the sauce from the ones that could still be salvaged. Then I packed the stuff back into my bag. I didn't know what the day would bring, but I was sure I wouldn't be staying here for the rest of the weekend. Coming downstairs around 8 in the morning, I found Corbin at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee and a tablet. He smiled embarrassedly at the sight of me. "Good morning, Mom. How did you sleep?" "Not great," I answered honestly, pouring myself a cup of coffee. Too many thoughts. "About what?" He tried to feign casual interest, but I could see his shoulders tense. I sat across from him, looking him straight in the eye. "About our conversation with Isadora last night, about her throwing my family album in the trash." Corbin choked on his coffee. "What? She couldn't have—" "She could." I pulled one of the damaged photos out of my robe pocket, a shot of little Corbin and his grandfather fishing, now with a brown sauce stain across the kid's face. This is what it did to our memories. The sun turned pale, looking at the ruined photo. "Yeah, I didn't know. I'll talk to her. And also," I continued, not letting him take the lead, "I heard you talking about Golden Autumn yesterday, about how you plan to sell my house." He looked away, tapping his fingers nervously on the table. "Mom, it's not what you think." "What am I supposed to think, Corbin?" My voice remained calm, even though everything was boiling inside. "That you're acting in my best interest, that for my own good you want to take away my home, my memories, my independence. We're worried about you." He began the familiar phrase. "You've been weaker since your illness, and Izzy and I thought—" "No, Corbin." I shook my head. "Don't act like it's a concern. Isadora told me straight out that you could use the money from the sale of the house for your partnership in the firm." He flinched as if I'd hit him. "It's not like that." "How?" I put the cup on the table. "Explain it to me. Explain why my own son is planning to put me in a nursing home behind my back and sell the house where 3 generations of our family grew up." At that moment, Isadora entered the kitchen, already fully dressed and with perfect makeup despite the early hour. "What are we talking about?" she asked, giving me a cold stare. "Mom knows about our plans for the house and Golden Autumn," Corbin said quietly, "and about the fact that you threw away her scrapbook." Isadora froze for a second, then shrugged. "So? She'd have to find out sooner or later anyway." "This is my house, Isadora." I stood up so I could look her straight in the eye. "It's mine, not yours." "For now, yes." She poured herself a cup of coffee, defiantly ignoring my tone. "But let's be realistic, Sylvia. You're not forever, and Corbin will eventually inherit the house. We're just speeding up the process." "Izzy!" Corbin exclaimed. "You can't say that." "Why not?" She turned to him. "Stop beating around the bush. Your mother needs supervision that we can't provide. The house needs constant investment. Selling would solve both problems at once." I looked at my son. "Is that your opinion too, Corbin? Am I just a problem for you to solve?" He looked crushed, his eyes darting between me and his wife. "No, of course not. But Izzy's right about leaving. You live alone, and at your age, that's dangerous. At my age? I questioned you. What do you know about my age? I'm 73 and more active than a lot of 40-year-olds. I drive a car. I keep my house in order. I'm involved in the community. I have plenty of friends who help out when needed. Friends? Isadora snorted. Those old ladies from the book club? They can barely walk themselves. Don't you dare talk about my friends like that, I said, steel in my voice. I'm telling the truth. She set the cup on the table. Here's the thing, Sylvia. We didn't bring you here to argue. We wanted to discuss your future in peace. But since you know everything, let's be honest. Golden Autumn is the best solution for you. The house will be sold. Part of the money will be used to pay for the boarding house, and the rest will be invested for your own good. For my own good? I grinned bitterly. Or yours? Mom, Corbin interjected. Please, let's discuss this calmly. Izzy didn't mean what she said. No, that's exactly right, Isadora interrupted. Stop coddling her, Corbin. She needs to understand the situation. I took a deep breath, pulling myself together. Let me be clear about something. The house belongs to me, only me, in your father's will, Corbin. I'm not moving, and the house is not for sale. Not now, not in the foreseeable future. Isadora rolled her eyes. Is that your final decision? Absolutely, I nodded. In that case, she walked over to the refrigerator and studied its contents defiantly. We have nothing to discuss. Izzy, Corbin said pleadingly, we agreed to talk calmly. You can't talk to her calmly. Isadora slammed the refrigerator door shut. She's a stubborn, selfish person who doesn't think about consequences. What will you do when something happens to her? When she falls and breaks her hip? Or forgets to turn off the gas? Are you going to quit your job and move in with her? I'm perfectly capable of taking care of myself, I countered, and I have friends who make sure everything's okay. Friends, Isadora laughed, as old and infirm as you are. That's enough. I got up from the table. I'm not going to listen to this. Corbin, I'm leaving. This weekend was a mistake. Mom, wait. He tried to hold my hand. Let's not be in a hurry. I think it's a great idea, Isadora intervened. Let her go home and think about our proposal. After all, she won't be able to do it on her own forever. I went upstairs to pack the rest of my things. My hands shook with anger and resentment, but I forced myself to breathe deeply and stay calm. This was no time for weakness. I could hear Corbin and Isadora continuing to argue downstairs, their voices growing louder. When I returned to the kitchen with my bag and the damaged photo album, I saw that the situation had escalated. Isadora was waving her arms around, and Corbin looked completely lost. I'm leaving, I announced, heading for the door. Sylvia, Isadora blocked my path. You're making a mistake. Think about Corbin. He needs to focus on his career, not worrying about you all the time. He's not, I countered. He'd visited me twice in the last 6 months, for 10 minutes at a time, even at the hospital, because he has a responsible job, Isadora exclaimed. Not everyone can afford to be idle in retirement. It was too much. I ran an antique store for 30 years. I worked 6 days a week, raised my son alone after my husband died, and kept the house in perfect condition. Calling it idle was the last straw. I've had enough. I tried to step around Isadora, but she stood in front of me again. No, you will listen to me to the end. Her voice was ringing with tension. We offer a reasonable solution. You will live in comfortable conditions under the care of specialists, and we won't have to fuss over your stubbornness all the time. Mom? Corbin moved closer. Maybe we should at least look at Golden Autumn. I've been there. It's a really nice place. I looked at my son bitterly. You've already made up your mind, haven't you? It doesn't matter what I want. What matters is convenience for you. It's not like that. Yes, it is, Isadora cut it off. And stop pretending. You said yourself that you were tired of her manipulations. I froze, looking at my son. Did you say that? Corbin looked away, and that was more eloquent than any answer. You see, Isadora said triumphantly, even Corbin realizes that we can't go on like this. It's time to get help. I took a deep breath. It's not help. It's about getting rid of me and getting my house. And you know what? It's not gonna work. I'm of sound mind and good judgment. My house belongs to me, period. Isadora's face suddenly changed. Gone was the ostentatious politeness, her eyes narrowed, and her voice became icy. We can challenge that. What? I couldn't believe my ears. We can file a petition to have you declared incompetent. She said it as casually as if she were talking about the weather. Given your age and recent illness, it's a real possibility. Corbin looked shocked. Izzy, we haven't discussed anything like this. That's because you're too soft, she snapped. Sometimes you have to be tough, especially when you're dealing with stubborn people like that. She nodded at me. I felt the ground slipping from under my feet, my own daughter-in-law threatening to sue me, and my son. My son just stands there, looking lost. You wouldn't dare, I said quietly. Yes, we dare. Isadora stepped toward me. And you know what? We'll win. Corbin has connections in legal circles. And then we'll sell this adorable house of yours and get rid of all that junk you keep there. Izzy, stop. Corbin finally intervened, grabbing her arm. You're overreacting. No, she shook off his hand. I'm just telling the truth. Your mother must realize she has no choice. There's always a choice. I gripped the handle of the bag tighter. And I choose to get out of here now. Good. Isadora opened the front door. Get out. Go home and think about what we said. And the next time your precious plumbing clogs or your roof leaks, don't call us. Take care of it yourself. Izzy. Corbin looked completely confused. Mom can't just leave. She needs to call a cab or I can take. I'll drive. I can drive myself, I said coldly. My car is in the parking lot. In your condition? Isadora snorted. After a scene like that? Are you out of your mind? You see, Corbin, she's completely irresponsible. I'm perfectly capable of driving. I headed for the door, but Isadora blocked my path again. No. Her voice sounded threatening. I won't let you drive like that and kill someone. You're staying here until you calm down. Don't tell me what to do. I tried to walk past her, but Isadora grabbed my shoulder firmly. Stop it. She was almost shouting. Why do you always make everything so complicated? Why can't you just accept help? Why do you have to make everyone's life a living hell? Let me go, I demanded, feeling her fingers digging into my shoulder. Izzy, stop it. Corbin finally intervened, pulling his wife away from me. You're only making it worse. Me? Isadora turned to him, her face twisted with anger. She's the one who always makes things worse. Her and her stupid house, her old things, her eternal reminders of what a good son you used to be. That's when I slipped past them to the door. Mom, wait. Corbin tried to stop me, but Isadora held him back. Let him go, she shouted. Let him go. Your lodging house is a street. These words caught me on the doorstep. I turned around slowly. What did you say? You heard me? Isadora looked at me with contempt. Your lodging house is the street. That's where you belong, you stubborn old witch. Corbin looked stunned. Izzy? Jesus? No, Corbin. I looked straight at my son. Let her talk. At least now I can see her real face. And yours. With those words, I walked out of the house, slamming the door behind me. My hands were shaking, but my steps were firm. I walked to my car, threw my bag in the back seat, and got behind the wheel. Through the cottage window, I could see Corbin and Isadora continuing to argue fiercely. I started the engine, but I wasn't in a hurry to leave. My mind was racing frantically. What to do? Where to go? Home? That would be the first place they'd find me. Pearls? It's too obvious. I need time to think how to protect myself from their plans. Suddenly, I thought of Ruth. She lives somewhere in this neighborhood. I think she mentioned last year that she'd bought a house near the lake, just a few miles from here. I pulled out my cell phone and dialed her number. Ruth, it's Sylvia. My voice sounded hoarse from the emotion I was holding back. Sylvia, what's wrong? Are you all right? I talked briefly about what had happened. The overheard conversation, the ruined album, the scene tonight, and Isadora's threats. Oh my God, Ruth exhaled. Where are you now? In the car outside their cottage. I don't know where to go. My place, of course, Ruth said firmly. I live 10 minutes from the lake. Write down the address. While I was writing it down, Ruth went on. And Sylvia, don't worry. We'll work something out. I have connections in the local community. If your sister-in-law wants a war, she'll get one. For the first time in these terrible 2 days, I felt a glimmer of hope. Connections? What connections? Remember I told you I run the local homeowners association? We have a very close relationship with every service in the neighborhood. Electricians, plumbers, deliveries, all local. And you know what? They don't really like rich newcomers who act like they own the place. A plan began to form in my head. Ruth, are you thinking what I'm thinking? If you're thinking of a little lesson for your daughter-in-law, yes, she said with determination. Come over soon and we'll discuss the details. I put the phone down and pulled onto the road. For the first time in a long time, I felt a surge of energy and determination. They wanted a war? Well, they'll get it. I'm not a helpless old woman to be shoved into a nursing home and forgotten. I'm Sylvia Abbott, and I know how to stand up for myself. Ruth's house turned out to be a cozy one-story cottage with a large garden. She met me on the doorstep, a short, energetic woman with short gray hair and a determined look. Come in quickly, she hugged me. You're trembling. From anger, not from fear, I clarified as I walked into the house. Over a cup of strong tea, I told her more about Corbin and Isadora's plans, about the threat to declare me incompetent, about Isadora throwing away my family album. That's out of line. Ruth shook her head. You know, I've always thought you should respond in the same language they use. Are they trying to make you dependent? It's time to show them what it's like to be dependent. She pulled out her cell phone and started making calls. First to the chairman of the local power company, an old friend of hers. Then to the water company where her nephew worked. Then to the grocery delivery service run by her former co-worker. With each conversation, the plan became clearer and clearer. So, said Ruth, finishing the last call, here's what's going to happen. In an hour, the power will be cut off at the cottage, ostensibly for routine work on the line. In another half an hour, the water supply will be cut off, mains failure. And when your son tries to order a delivery of food or groceries, they'll find out that their neighborhood is temporarily shut down due to road repairs. I looked at my friend with admiration. Ruth, you're a genius. No, dear, she grinned. It's just that in small communities, people help each other. They don't like it when someone hurts their friends. An hour later, Ruth's phone rang. It was Martin from the power company. It's done, he said. The power's out for technical reasons. They said it wouldn't be restored until tomorrow morning. Good, Ruth winked at me. What about the water? My wife's brother is on his way, Martin said. He'll shut off the supply in half an hour. He'll say there's a break in the main line, and the repair crew won't be here until tomorrow. Ruth and I looked at each other with a slight smile. The plan was starting to work, and from what we were told later, Corbin and Isadora were at a complete loss. faced with sudden domestic problems, no electricity, no water, no way to order food, in a strange house where they knew no one. It wasn't so much revenge as a lesson. Let them feel what it's like to have someone else control your life, limit your options, make you dependent. That's exactly what they had planned for me, and by the looks of it, the lesson was just beginning. Ruth's house was exactly as I had imagined it, cozy, full of life and warmth. There were pots of flowers everywhere, shelves full of books, and pictures of her large family, children, grandchildren, and even great-grandchildren, on the walls. "Make yourself comfortable," Ruth said, showing me to the guest bedroom. "You can stay as long as you need to." "Thank you." I set my bag by the bed. "But I don't want to burden you." Ruth waved her hand. "What burden? I've lived alone since Alan left. There are 4 bedrooms in this house, and only one is occupied. I'll be glad to have someone else here." I knew Ruth had been widowed 3 years ago, but unlike me, she had 4 children and an army of grandchildren who visited her regularly. Maybe that's why she never seemed lonely, always active, always at the center of some activity. Still, I sat down on the edge of the bed. This is only a temporary solution. I need to figure out what to do next. "What's there to think about?" Ruth sat down beside me. "You'll go back home and live the way you've always lived. And if your son and that, Isadora, try anything, we'll be ready." "You don't understand," I sighed. "They threatened to declare me incompetent. And Corbin's a lawyer. He knows how to do that." Ruth shook her head. "It would have to be on good grounds. Medical reports, testimony from neighbors, friends, they don't have any of that. What if they bribed someone, some doctor?" My fears, which I tried to suppress, came out. "Isadora is rich. She has connections in the fashion industry. And I'm just an old woman who's stopping them from getting a house." "All right, that's enough." Ruth stood up with her arms at her sides. "Sylvia Abbott, I've known you for 30 years, and I've never heard you so sour. You're not just an old woman. You're a respected person in our community, and you have a lot more friends than you realize." I smiled weakly. "Thank you for your support, but—" "No buts." She walked to the window. "Do you know why it was so easy for me to organize the disconnection of all communications in that cottage? Not because I'm some big shot. It's because people remember who helped them once." I looked at her in surprise. "What do you mean?" "Martin from the power company." Ruth turned to me. "Remember when his daughter wanted to go to art school, but they didn't have enough money for tuition? Who helped them find a scholarship and wrote a letter of recommendation? You, Sylvia. And Martin's daughter is now a famous illustrator in New York." I remembered that story. Carol, a talented girl, used to come to my store to look at antique prints. I noticed her gift and really helped with her enrollment, but that was almost 20 years ago. "And Martha's nephew from the waterworks," Ruth continued, "a troubled teenager who'd been expelled from 3 schools, who found him a rehabilitation program through art. You again, Sylvia. He's now a successful restorer working with museums." I shook my head. "Ruth, that was a long time ago. People forget good deeds." "No, dear," she smiled. "They don't forget real kindness. You've helped people all these years, not for profit or gratitude, but because you could help. And now those people are ready to help you." Her words touched me to the core. I always thought I was living an ordinary life, running a store, doing community work, sometimes helping those who need help. I never realized that these small acts of kindness leave such a mark. "Thank you," I said quietly. "But I still don't see how this will help me against Corbin and Isadora. Cutting off the cottage's utilities is a temporary inconvenience. They'll just find another place to live and continue with their plans." Ruth smiled slyly. "Now, here's where it gets interesting. Let's go into the kitchen. I'll make some tea and we'll talk about it. In the kitchen, over a cup of fragrant herbal tea, Ruth outlined her plan. The more she talked, the more I realized that I had underestimated my friend. Now, she laid out a map of the neighborhood in front of us. Right now, your son and his wife are in a cottage with no light or water. Soon they'll want to move out. And that's where the second stage of our plan begins. What plan? I asked curiously. Tomorrow morning, the owners of the cottage will receive a notice from the local administration about the need for urgent repair of the septic system. It's an environmental hazard, you know. The guests will have to vacate the premises immediately. I looked at her in surprise. Can you organize that? Of course, Ruth nodded. Jeremy Hawkins, the head of the local environmental committee, goes to our church. And by the way, his mother is a regular customer of your former store. Remember when you helped her find a rare edition of Dickens for her collection? I smiled. Mrs. Hawkins, of course I do. Wonderful woman. So, Ruth continued, when Corbin and Isadora get their eviction notice, they'll have to find a new place to live. But, here's the problem. All the hotels and motels in the neighborhood will be booked. All of them? I couldn't believe my ears. Is that possible? In our little community, yes. Ruth nodded. We only have 3 decent hotels and a couple of motels on the highway. I've already talked to the managers. As soon as your son and daughter-in-law try to make a reservation, they'll be told there's no room. But it's almost like a conspiracy, I muttered, not knowing whether to admire or worry. Not a conspiracy, a lesson, Ruth corrected me. They wanted to control your life. Let them feel what it's like to have someone controlling them. At that moment, Ruth's cell phone rang. She answered it, listened for a few seconds, then smiled. Great, thanks for the information. She hung up and turned to me. That was Mrs. Johnson's son, who is renting the cottage to your relatives. Corbin had already called and complained about the lack of electricity and water, demanded immediate repairs or a refund. And what did they tell him? They said the repair service wouldn't be here until tomorrow, and that the money would have to go to the company office, which is closed until Monday. Ruth giggled like a schoolgirl. I think they're getting nervous. I couldn't help but smile, imagining Isadora's reaction to the lack of basic amenities. A woman who couldn't imagine life without her daily manicure and styling was in a house with no hot water or electricity. But I feel a little sorry for Corbin, I admitted. He's my son, after all. The son who planned to put you in a nursing home and sell your house? Ruth reminded me. The same son who stood by while his wife insulted you and threw away your family heirlooms? I sighed. I know, but still, he's my child. I remember him as a little boy who came running to me with his problems, who cried on my shoulder when his father died. Ruth softened. I understand. A mother's feelings can't be turned off, but sometimes children need to be taught, even if they're adults, especially if they're adults and they're acting like spoiled teenagers. We talked for a few more hours, discussing the details of the plan and reminiscing about the past. Ruth told me how, after I'd left the cottage, she'd used her connections, calling people she knew, and building our little retaliation operation, as she called it. It turned out that I had helped far more people over the years than I remembered. The owner of a local bakery whose son I helped get into culinary school, a librarian for whom I found rare books for an exhibit, a teacher for whom I donated an antique globe for the school's geography room. All these people were now willing to help me. I feel strange, I admitted to Ruth, like I'm using people. You're not using anyone, she countered. People want to help. It's called community, Sylvia. We help each other. It always has been and always will be. That evening, as we sat on the veranda watching the sunset, Ruth's phone rang again. This time it was Martha from the food delivery service. A man just called from the Johnsons' cottage. she said. He was trying to order dinner. He sounded very annoyed when he found out that delivery was temporarily out of service in their neighborhood. Great. Ruth thanked her and turned to me. They're already hungry. No lights, no water, no food. I think they'll be ready to move out by morning. I hope Isadora doesn't eat Corbin out of spite, I joked, and we both laughed. The next morning, Ruth and I were having breakfast on the terrace when the doorbell rang. It was Jeremy Hawkins, the head of the local environmental committee. "Good morning, ladies," he said with a friendly smile. "I've brought a copy of the notice that has just been delivered to the owners of the cottage by the lake. It's an official notice of urgent repair to the septic system, requiring them to vacate the premises immediately." "Jeremy, you're a miracle." Ruth hugged him. "How's your mom?" "Fine." He nodded. "She said hello to Sylvia and that if she needed to be certified as sane and able to live on her own, she'd be first in line." I smiled, touched by that suggestion. "Tell her I said thank you." After Jeremy left, Ruth pulled out her binoculars. "You can see the cottage from my terrace. Would you like to see how things develop?" "It's kind of rude." I hesitated. "Like peeping." "It's nothing like that," Ruth objected. "It's strategic surveillance. We need to know when they leave the house so we can activate the next part of the plan." I couldn't resist that argument. We sat on the terrace with binoculars and took turns watching the cottage. About an hour later, a car appeared there. A representative man in uniform handed something to Corbin, who was standing on the porch. Even from a distance, they could see how tense his figure was. "The notice has been delivered," Ruth commented. "Now we wait for a reaction." It didn't take long. 20 minutes later, we saw Corbin and Isadora carrying the things out and loading them into the car. Even without binoculars, we could see that Isadora was furious, waving her arms and apparently yelling at Corbin. "They're leaving," Ruth said, handing me the binoculars. "Now the fun begins." We went back to the house, and Ruth started calling her informants. The first call was to the local Pine Tree Inn, the most decent hotel in the area. "Maggie, it's Ruth. Have they called yet?" She listened to the answer and smiled at me. "Good. And what did you tell them? The dental conference has booked all the rooms? Great." The next call was to a motel on the highway. "Bobby, did they contact you? Are they here yet? And you said the burst pipe caused half the rooms to flood and the rest are occupied? Well done." And so on. Hotel after hotel, motel after motel. Everywhere Corbin and Isadora got the same answer. No room. I wondered what they would do now. I wondered, would they go to another town? "I don't think so." Ruth shook her head. "It's almost an hour's drive to the nearest big city, and Isadora, from what you've told me, is not a patient person." "That's an understatement." I remembered the scene from last night. She'd been furious at the thought of spending the weekend without her usual comforts. "That's right," Ruth nodded. "I think they'll start calling people soon, and when that doesn't work—" She didn't finish, but I understood her meaning. When all options are exhausted, they'll have to come to me, the same old woman they wanted to put in a nursing home. We spent the day doing the usual chores. Ruth worked in the garden. I helped her. Then we cooked dinner. But we kept our cell phones handy at all times, waiting for news from our agents. At about 3 o'clock in the afternoon, Martha called from the delivery service. "Ruth, they've tried to order lunch from every restaurant in the neighborhood. They've been turned down everywhere. Either the delivery service isn't working or there's too long a line." The man sounded completely exhausted. "Thank you, Martha." Ruth hung up the phone and turned to me. "They're still trying to solve the problem on their own, but I think they'll give up soon." And indeed, at about 5 o'clock in the evening, the phone rang. I looked at the phone screen and saw Corbin's name. My heart started to race. I showed the phone to Ruth and she nodded. "Answer it, but don't just take whatever they offer." I took a deep breath and pressed the button. "Yes?" Mom? Corbin's voice sounded exhausted. Where are you? We're worried. Are you? I tried to keep my voice calm. I thought you seemed very happy to see me leave last night. What was it Isadora said? Your lodging is the street? A heavy sigh on the other end of the line. Mom, Izzy overreacted. She didn't mean to. Don't lie, Corbin, I interrupted. That's exactly what she meant to say. And you didn't stop her. Just like you didn't stop her from throwing out my family album. Mom, please. He sounded desperate. Can we talk in person? We're having problems with the cottage. We had to move out. What kind of trouble? I pretended not to know. First, the electricity and water were cut off, and this morning we got a notice about some emergency repairs. We've been asked to vacate the premises immediately. How unpleasant. I tried to keep the sarcasm out of my voice. Where are you now? In the car, he admitted. We've been to every hotel and motel in the area. Every place is full. Even that roadside bed and breakfast, where there's usually room. I imagined Isadora's reaction to having to spend the night in a roadside bed and breakfast, and I barely held back a smile. What do you suggest? I asked. Mom, his voice sounded almost pleading. Could we meet? Talk? Isadora is very upset, and I understand, I interrupted. You're worried about your wife's comfort. Were you thinking about my comfort when you planned to send me to Golden Autumn and sell my house? Silence on the other end of the line. It wasn't, he finally said. No, Corbin, it is. I was firm. I heard everything. Your conversation in the study. How you talked about selling the house and how you were going to spend the money. Mom. No, now you listen to me. I put all the firmness I could into my voice. I've lived in this house for 50 years. I raised you in it. I buried your father and moved on. I've handled everything on my own. The business, the house, life. And I'm not going to let you or anyone else decide my fate behind my back. I understand. His voice sounded depressed. We did discuss it, but no buts. I was adamant. You didn't just discuss it. Isadora threatened to declare me incompetent. That's a serious accusation, Corbin, and a very dangerous one. There was a long silence. You're right, he said at last. Things have gone too far. Yeah, I'll call you later. And he hung up. I looked at Ruth. He didn't ask for help. He didn't ask me to come to him. Pride, Ruth nodded. Or maybe Isadora wouldn't let him humiliate himself in front of you. But they're in a desperate situation. Sooner or later, they'll have to turn to you. And she was right. An hour later, the phone rang again. This time, Isadora's name came up. What a twist, Ruth whispered. The queen herself had condescended to call. I hesitated to answer, but curiosity got the better of me. Hello? Sylvia. Isadora's voice was cold and tense. We need to talk. I'm listening, I answered calmly. Not over the phone, she cut me off. In person, where are you? Why do you need to know? I asked. Yesterday you threw me out of the house, saying that my lodging was on the street. Today, all of a sudden, you want to meet me? Look, she sounded irritated. Let's put this on hold. We're having some problems with our accommodations, and we were thinking, what can I do to help? I finished for her. It's funny how quickly attitudes change when you need help. Silence on the line, then a deep sigh. Sylvia, I admit I overreacted yesterday. I said some things I shouldn't have said. But right now, we really need your help. That was the closest thing to an apology I'd ever heard from Isadora. What kind of help do you need exactly? I asked. We have no place to stay, she said, a note of desperation in her voice. All the hotels in the area are booked. Do you know anyone we could stay with? Or maybe you know a place to stay. I looked over at Ruth. The plan had worked perfectly. Now Corbin and Isadora were in the same situation they'd put me in, homeless, dependent on other people's help. Let me think. I paused. I suppose I could help. But first, we really need to meet and talk about something. Of course, Isadora agreed hastily. Where and when? Martha's Cafe on the main street. In an hour. We'll be there, she said and hung up. I put the phone down and looked at Ruth. They're desperate. Isadora almost apologized. Almost? Ruth laughed. It's not enough, but we're on the right track. She winked at me. The next phase of our plan is beginning. Martha's Cafe was typical small-town cozy with checkered tablecloths and pictures of the local scenery on the walls. When I walked in, the few customers nodded hello. Everyone here knew each other. Hi, Sylvia. Martha, a full woman with a kind smile, waved at me from behind the counter. Your table is ready, in the far corner, just like you asked. Thank you, Martha. I headed to the designated spot. I had chosen a table away from the windows and other customers. The conversation I was about to have was not meant for other people's ears. I ordered a cup of tea and waited. Ruth offered to come with me, but I refused. It was my fight, and I had to fight it myself. At exactly the right time, the door opened, and Corbin and Isadora came in. Even from a distance, it was obvious how exhausted they were. Wrinkled clothes, tired faces, tense shoulders. It was especially noticeable on Isadora, who was used to looking immaculate at all times. Now her hair was in a sloppy ponytail, her makeup was missing, and her designer suit looked like it had been slept in. They spotted me and headed toward the table. Corbin looked guilty. Isadora looked annoyed but holding back. Mom, Corbin leaned over to kiss my cheek, but I pulled away slightly and he straightened awkwardly. Have a seat. I pointed to the chairs across from me. Would you like to order something? Coffee, Isadora said immediately. Double espresso. Same here, Corbin nodded. I called the waitress over and placed my order. When she left, there was an awkward silence. Isadora tapped her fingers nervously on the table, and Corbin avoided looking me in the eye. So? I finally broke the silence. Are you having trouble finding a place to live? Yes, Corbin cleared his throat. It's an unbelievable coincidence. First, the cottage had all its utilities cut off. Then we were evicted because of some emergency repairs. And now all the hotels in the area are supposedly booked. Allegedly? I raised an eyebrow. That's weird, Isadora interjected. We've called every place in the area. We've called every place in the area, and the answer is the same. No vacancies. Not even that hole on the highway where it's usually empty. Maybe there's an event in town, I suggested. A festival or a conference? I asked. Corbin shook his head. One place said there was a dentist's conference, another a beekeeper's convention, another some kind of family gathering. It didn't sound credible. I could hardly contain a smile. Ruth had thought of all the details. Each hotel and motel had its own legend. What do you plan to do? I asked, sipping my tea. Actually, that's why we wanted to meet you. Corbin finally looked me in the eye. Mom, we need help. What kind of help? I pretended I didn't understand. We don't have a place to sleep, Isadora said bluntly. Do you know anyone in this town? Maybe someone who rents a room or an apartment? I looked at them thoughtfully. Here they were, my relatives, who yesterday were planning to send me to a nursing home and sell my house, and now they were asking for help with a place to stay. Let me think. I paused. Most of the people I know here are as old as I am. I doubt you'd want to stay with any of them. Mom, please. Corbin sounded desperate. We've been driving around town for hours. Izzy needs to rest. Yes, Sylvia, Isadora said, trying to be polite, though it was obvious she was struggling. I'm very tired, and I need to clean up before I go back to New York. You're going to New York? I pretended to be surprised. So soon? What's the point of staying? Isadora shrugged. The weekend's ruined, but we can't leave right now. It's 5 hours of driving, and we're both exhausted. The waitress brought their coffee. Isadora greedily took a sip, as if it might give her strength. Corbin looked like a man ready to fall asleep at the table. I think I can help, I said at last. My friend Ruth lives not far from here. She has a big house and a yard. I don't think she'd mind if you slept there. Does she have a spare room? Isadora perked up. I paused, savoring the moment. The rooms, unfortunately, are all taken, but she has a tent and sleeping bags. You can set up in the courtyard. Isadora stared at me as if I had suggested she sleep in a garbage can. A tent? Are you kidding? Not at all. I sipped my tea calmly. The weather's nice. It's not cold at night. A lot of people like camping. We are not many. Isadora cut Isadora off. I'm a clothing designer, not a scout. I'm not going to sleep on the ground in some canvas bag. Izzy, Corbin said quietly. We don't have a choice. There's always a choice. She turned to him. We can go to the next town. There's probably a hotel there. It's almost an hour to the next town, Corbin reminded her. And we're both exhausted. I'm not sure I can drive that far. Then you stay here and I'll go. Isadora was beginning to lose patience. With what? Corbin asked. We only have one car. A cab? Uber? She pulled out her phone and started searching for something, but after a minute she sighed disappointedly. Hell, there isn't even decent internet here. I watched the scene, feeling strangely satisfied. Isadora, who had always been in control, was now helpless in the face of simple domestic problems. Okay, she finally gave in, turning to me. Where is your friend's house? I gave them Ruth's address and explained how to get there. Where are you staying, Mom? Corbin asked. At Ruth's, I answered, in the guest bedroom. Isadora gave me a suspicious look. There's a spare bedroom, but you're offering us a tent? There are 4 bedrooms, I explained. Ruth has one, I have one. Her grandchildren are here for the weekend, and the 4th is used as an office. The tent was the only option. It was a lie. Ruth had no grandchildren this weekend, and 2 rooms were available. But Corbin and Isadora couldn't know that. I'll call Ruth and let her know you're coming. I pulled out my cell phone and moved to the window, ostensibly for better communication. Ruth answered at once, as if she'd been expecting a call. Well, did they agree? Yes, I said quietly. They'll be at your place in half an hour. Get the tent ready. It's ready. I could almost hear the smile in her voice. I put it in the farthest corner of the yard, under the apple tree. The old one, the one with the moth holes and the zipper sticking up. Perfect. I smiled and returned to the table. It's all right. Ruth's waiting for you. The tent will be ready. How generous, Isadora said, finishing her coffee. By the way, I remembered something important. Ruth's washing machine is broken, so the shower will be a problem. There's hardly any hot water. Isadora's face stretched. But what about... You can wash from a bucket. I shrugged. That's what we used to do when we were young, when we went to the country. Corbin, Isadora turned to her husband. This is a nightmare. Are you sure we can't find another option? Izzy, please. He looked utterly exhausted. It's just for one night. Tomorrow morning we'll leave for New York and forget about this like a bad dream. She gave up, but it was clear from her face that she would remember this humiliation for a long time. All right, Isadora said dryly, standing up. Let's go to that Ruth of yours. But be warned, Sylvia, I shall not forget this hospitality. That's what I'm counting on, I smiled. Remembering important lessons is a useful skill. We paid and left the cafe. They got into their car, and I got into mine. All the way to Ruth's house, I thought about how quickly our roles had changed. Yesterday, they were the masters of the situation, and I was the unwelcome guest. Today, they were at my mercy. When we arrived, Ruth was waiting on the porch. She played the role of hostess masterfully, not letting on that she knew of our plan. Welcome. She shook hands with Corbin and Isadora. Sylvia told me about your problems. Terrible bad luck. Yes, Isadora agreed grimly, looking around the yard. The tent's over there. Ruth pointed to the far corner of the lot, where a shabby green tent was visible under an old apple tree. I put sleeping bags and a flashlight inside. Very nice. Isadora forced out a smile that looked more like a grimace. And the restroom? Corbin asked, looking around. In the house, of course, Ruth answered. But after 9 o'clock at night, I usually lock the doors. Age, security. So if you need to go out at night, there's an outdoor toilet behind the barn. Isadora's face became so expressive that I could hardly contain my laughter. You can go inside to wash up, Ruth continued. It's true, as Sylvia probably mentioned, there's no hot water, but there's enough for a quick rinse. Isadora looked at Corbin as desperately as if he'd brought her to a prison camp. Would you like some tea? Ruth suggested. Or something to eat? Yes, please, Corbin said gratefully. We went into the house. Isadora went straight to the bathroom, and Corbin sat down at the kitchen table. He looked as if he hadn't slept in days. Rough day? I asked, looking at my son. Not a word. He rubbed his face with his hands. Everything's been a mess since this morning. It happens, I shrugged. Life sometimes teaches unexpected lessons. He looked at me carefully. Mom, did you have anything to do with what's going on? No? What do you mean? I made an innocent face. It's all of it. The disconnection of communications at the cottage, the emergency repairs, the lack of hotel accommodations. Too many coincidences. Corbin, I shook my head. Do you really think your 73-year-old mother is capable of plotting against the power company and all the hotels in town? You flatter me. He looked unsure. No, of course not. But just bad luck. Ruth intervened, setting a cup of tea in front of him. It happens in small towns. All the services are interconnected, and if one breaks down, the rest fall apart. Corbin nodded, but there was still doubt in his eyes. Isadora returned at that moment, looking even more annoyed than before. The water's ice cold, and the towels smell musty. Izzy, Corbin shouted at her. I'm sorry. Ruth smiled, not at all offended. Age takes its toll, and sometimes you don't notice things like that. Your eyes aren't what they used to be. Your sense of smell is dulled. It was another little stiletto, a reminder of how Isadora felt about the elderly. We sat over tea for a while longer. Isadora was silent, throwing unhappy glances around, and Corbin was too exhausted to keep up the conversation. Perhaps we should rest, he said at last, standing up. Thank you for the tea and for the shelter. You're welcome. Ruth walked them to the door. If you need anything, just knock. I'll see you at 9 o'clock tonight. They went out into the courtyard and headed for the tent, Isadora walking as if she were being led to her execution. Through the kitchen window, we watched them trying to get settled into the dilapidated tent, which was clearly designed for one person, not two. Perfect, Ruth whispered, watching the scene. They're not likely to sleep there. Are you sure it's not too cruel? I asked, suddenly feeling a prick of conscience. Cruel? Ruth turned to me. Isn't it cruel to plan to put you in a nursing home against your will? Isn't it cruel to throw away your family album? I sighed. You're right, it's just, he's still my son. Who let his wife treat you like garbage? Ruth reminded me. But don't worry, physically they're perfectly safe. They'll just have a very uncomfortable night. It'll give them something to think about. We went back to the living room. Ruth turned on the television, but I wasn't really listening. My thoughts revolved around Corbin and Isadora and our plan and what would happen next. You know, Ruth said suddenly, turning off the TV, while you were at the meeting with them, I got a call from Helen Connor. Helen? I was surprised. Helen was the owner of a local jewelry store, and we didn't know each other. Why? She heard from Martha that you were in town and that you were having trouble with your sister-in-law, Ruth explained. She thought there was something you should know. What was it? I was worried. Remember you said Isadora was married before Corbin? Yes, to a businessman. I nodded. They divorced shortly before she met Corbin. Not exactly. Ruth stepped forward. According to Helen, her first husband didn't divorce her. He died. Died? I was shocked. Corbin had never mentioned it. Because he probably doesn't know, Ruth continued. Helen told me that her niece works at a large law firm in New York. Everyone there knows Isadora Price's story. She was married to Gerald Higgins, who owned a chain of boutiques. He was much older than her. He was in his 60s when they married. And what happened? I could feel my heart start to beat faster. He died under strange circumstances. Officially, a heart attack. But there were rumors that Isadora had, helped him to pass away. Are you suggesting murder? I couldn't believe my ears. No, no. Ruth was quick to clarify. Nothing had been proven. But after his death, it turned out that he had changed his will in Isadora's favor the week before, depriving his children from his first marriage of a large part of the inheritance. Oh my God! I felt my back grow cold. And Corbin doesn't know about this? According to Helen, the Higgins children had tried to contest the will, claiming that Isadora had manipulated their father, perhaps even drugged him to make him more suggestible. But the case was dropped, too little evidence, and Isadora hired the best lawyers. And how did Helen know that? I still couldn't believe what I was hearing. Her niece worked for the firm that represented the Higgins children, Ruth explained. She wasn't involved in the case, but she'd heard all the details. Besides, it was a high-profile case in certain circles in New York, though not much information had gotten out to the press. I leaned back in my chair, trying to make sense of what I'd heard. Could Isadora be more than just an unpleasant snob, but a real fortune hunter? And if that was true, was Corbin in danger? Ruth. I lowered my voice, even though I knew Corbin and Isadora couldn't hear us. Do you think she married Corbin for the money? He has a good salary, but he's not rich. I don't know. Ruth looked thoughtful. Maybe she's just found the right man, someone successful enough to be influential. Or maybe it was part of a longer-term plan. What kind of plan? Think about it. Ruth leaned closer. If they put you in a nursing home and sold your house, where would the money go? And when you're gone, who gets your savings? I felt myself getting hot. Do you think she's planning? I couldn't say it out loud. I'm not saying anything, Ruth said quickly, but Helen's information is worth checking out. And maybe Corbin should know who he's involved with. I spent the rest of the evening in confusion. The thought that Isadora might not just be an unpleasant woman, but a real con artist, kept me on my toes. I decided that tomorrow I would call my old friend Edward, the lawyer, and ask him to make inquiries about Isadora Price and her first husband. At 9 o'clock that evening, as promised, Ruth locked the doors of the house. From my second-floor bedroom window, I could see the far corner of the yard where the tent stood. The faint light of a flashlight burned inside, and even from a distance, I could hear muffled voices. Corbin and Isadora were clearly arguing. I watched the scene with a strange feeling. Revenge had been sweet, but now there was an uneasiness to it. What if Isadora really is dangerous? What if Corbin is in more danger than I thought? Deciding not to torture myself with these thoughts until morning, I stepped away from the window and went to bed. Tomorrow would be a new day, and I would continue to uncover the truth about Isidore. For now, let her spend the night in an uncomfortable tent, with cold water and an outdoor toilet, a small part of the humiliation she had planned for me. The morning was clear and cool. I woke early, feeling strangely light, as if a night in a cozy bed while Corbin and Isadora agonized in the tent had washed away some of my resentment and anger. When I went down to the kitchen, I found Ruth preparing breakfast. The smell of freshly brewed coffee and scrambled eggs and bacon filled the house. "Good morning," Ruth smiled when she saw me. "How did you sleep?" "Good." I went to the window and looked out into the yard. The tent was still standing, but there was no sign of life around. "Are our guests still asleep?" "I don't think so," Ruth hummed, flipping bacon in a frying pan. "At 5 o'clock this morning, I heard some movement in the yard. I think they were trying to get into the house, but the doors were locked, just as I'd promised." At breakfast, I shared my thoughts with Ruth about what I had learned yesterday about Isidore. "I called Edward, the lawyer I know," I said. "He promised to look into Isadora's first husband and his will. He should call back today." At that moment, the door to the kitchen opened, and Corbin and Isadora walked in. Both looked as if they hadn't slept in a week, wrinkled, with dark circles under their eyes and dirty clothes. Isadora looked especially pathetic, her hair sticking up in all directions, her cheek covered in something that looked like mud, and her designer suit was hopelessly ruined. "Good morning," Ruth greeted them with a nonchalant look. "How did you sleep?" Isadora gave her a look that would have frozen hell. "Terrible, if you must know. Your tent is leaking. There are bugs in the sleeping bags, and the ground is so hard I think I hurt my back." When Ruth had tactfully withdrawn, leaving us alone, I decided to cut to the chase. "I know about your plans to send me to Golden Autumn and sell my house," I said calmly. "That's not gonna happen." "Mom, we've already talked about this," Corbin began, but I held up my hand, stopping him. "I'm not done yet. I know about Isadora's threats to declare me incompetent. You have no grounds for that." At that moment, my cell phone rang. Seeing Edward's name on the screen, I apologized and went into the next room. "Edward?" I lowered my voice. "What did you recognize?" "Sylvia?" My old friend's voice sounded serious. "It's confirmed. Gerald Higgins had indeed changed his will a week before he died, leaving most of his estate to Isadora. His children tried to challenge this in court, claiming he was out of his mind or under the influence of medication. What did the court decide? The case was dismissed for lack of evidence. But interestingly enough, the children's attorneys hired a private investigator who discovered that a similar scheme had been used by Isadora before. Before Higgins, she had been close to another elderly businessman, Richard Pearson. He, too, had suddenly changed his will in her favor, even though they were not married, and he, too, died soon afterward, officially of a stroke. Returning to the kitchen with a heavy heart, I decided to act directly. "Corbin," I sat down across from my son. "I need to talk to you alone." "What?" Isadora immediately tensed up. "What is it you can't talk about in front of me?" "Isadora," I turned to her. "Or rather, should I call you Mrs. Higgins?" Her face paled as sharply as if all the blood had been drained from it. "Gerald Higgins," I said slowly, "your first husband, the one who had so successfully changed his will the week before he died suddenly." "Mom, what are you talking about?" Corbin shifted his gaze from me to Isadora, who was frozen like a statue. "Ask your wife," I kept my eyes on Isadora. "Ask her why she never told you about her first husband, how he died, about his children's lawsuit." "Izzy?" Corbin turned to his wife. "Is it true?" After a stormy scene that revealed all the dark sides of Isadora's past, including her possible involvement in the deaths of elderly wealthy men, Corbin made a decision. I want a divorce, he said firmly. Isadora left in a rage, promising legal action. When Corbin and I were alone, I decided to share my plans with him. I've decided to sell the house, I said calmly. What? Corbin looked shocked. But you always said you'd never sell it. I've changed my mind, I shrugged. The house is too big for one person, and it holds too many memories, both good and not so good. It's time to move on. Where are you going to move to? I'm going to travel, I answered, enjoying his amazement. All my life I've wanted to see the world, but there were always reasons to stay. But you know what I've realized in these few days? Life is short, and I want to live it to the fullest. And the money? Corbin's practicality took over. I have savings, and the house is worth a lot. I'll donate some of it to the restoration of the old library. You know how much I love that building, and the rest will be used for my adventures. And me? He looked confused. You're just, leave? Corbin, I took his hand. You're a grown man with a life of your own. You have your own way, but I should have my own. 3 months later, I was standing at a bus stop in New Haven with an old suitcase. The house had been sold to a young family with 2 children. They reminded me of Henry and me years ago. I donated a substantial sum to the restoration of the historic library and set aside the rest for traveling. Corbin came to see me off. After Isadora left, it was as if he'd awakened from a long slumber, becoming an attentive son again, calling regularly, helping with the sale of the house. He still didn't fully understand my decision to travel, but he respected it. Are you sure you don't want me to take you to the airport? He asked, taking my suitcase from me to put it in the luggage compartment of the bus. I'm sure you do, I smiled. It was symbolic, starting the trip on a bus from New Haven, the city where I'd spent most of my life. Where to first? He was still holding my hand, hesitant to let go. Rome, I smiled dreamily. Then Florence, Venice, and then we'll see. Will you write? Every day, I promised, and call when I get a chance. The boarding was announced, and I hugged my son tightly. Take care of yourself, he whispered. Take care of yourself. I pulled away and looked into his eyes. And remember, it's never too late to start your life again. Nestled against the window, I waved to Corbin as the bus pulled away. He stood at the stop until we were around the corner. I leaned back in the seat, feeling a strange mixture of excitement and peace. At 73, my life wasn't ending. It was just beginning. And it was the most beautiful revenge I could think of. Not anger, not bitterness, but freedom and joy of life. Let Isadora and those who thought they could control me see. Sylvia Abbott chooses her own destiny, and that choice is a beautiful one.